The city has gone to bed. Above the cobbles of a narrow London street that most people walk past without ever seeing, the lamps have burned down low, and the shop windows have gone dark behind their shutters. The wand makers and the apothecaries, the owl emporium, and the cauldron stall, all of them are closed and quiet for the night. Yet there is one building on this street that never fully sleeps. It stands taller than its neighbors and leans a little, a great pile of snowy white stone that catches whatever moonlight there is and holds it. Two bronze doors at its front are shut now, and behind them, far behind them, deeper than you might believe a building in the middle of a city could ever go, the work goes on. Lamps still gutter in long stone halls. Carts still rattle somewhere in the dark below, and the gold, mountains of it, sits in silence in the cold. This is Gringotts, and tonight, while the rest of the street dreams, we are going to go down into it. Not quickly, there is no hurry here. We are going to take our time and walk the whole long history of the place, the way you might wander through an old house at the end of a long day, running your hand along the banisters, pausing at every door. So settle yourself. Let your shoulders come down from around your ears. Let the bed take your weight. You do not have to remember any of this in the morning. You only have to listen and let the words carry you down, floor by floor, year by year, into the deepest and strangest bank that has ever been built. We will begin where every visitor begins, on the steps. Picture the front of the building in your mind. A flight of white stone stairs rises to a set of burnished bronze doors, and standing beside them, in a uniform of scarlet and gold, waits a goblin. He is shorter than a man by a good distance, with a clever, lined face, and long fingers, and eyes that miss nothing. He bows as you pass, the smallest possible bow, polite and cold at the same time, and he watches you go in. Beyond the bronze doors there is a second set, silver this time, and on the silver someone has carved a warning in tall, thin letters. The words have stood there for a very long time. They read like this: Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. For those who take, but do not earn, must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned. Beware of finding more than treasure there. Read it slowly. It is not decoration. It is a promise, made in stone, by people who keep their promises, and we will come to understand exactly what waits beneath the floors for anyone foolish enough to test it. For now, simply step through the silver doors and into the hall. The vastness of it is the first thing. The entrance hall of Gringotts is a long room with a marble floor and a ceiling so high that the light from the lamps cannot quite reach it, so the upper air is always a soft brown gloom. Down both sides run long counters, and behind the counters, on tall stools, sit perhaps 100 goblins. Some are weighing coins on brass scales, the little weights clicking as they are added and taken away. Some are examining precious stones through eyeglasses, turning a ruby in the lamplight to look for the flaw inside it. Some are writing in enormous ledgers with quills that scratch across the parchment in long, even lines. There are doors leading off the hall in every direction, and other goblins are showing people in and out of them, and the whole room hums with a low, industrious murmur, the sound of money being counted and counted again. It smells of cold stone, of metal, of old paper and ink. It is one of the few places in the wizarding world where almost everyone, sooner or later, has to come. The poorest family and the oldest aristocratic house both walk across this same marble floor, and both are weighed by the same careful goblin eyes. To understand why that is, why this single building came to sit at the center of an entire society's wealth, you have to understand that it was not always here. There was a time, long ago, when wizards had no bank at all, and the story of how that changed is stranger and older than most of the people crossing this hall will ever know. Before we go down any further, a small and quiet thing. If you find this place restful, if the murmur of the hall and the cool of the stone is helping the day loosen its grip on you, then consider following along on this channel and leaving a like before you drift off. It costs you nothing. It helps these long stories find the next tired person who needs somewhere calm to put their mind at the end of the day, and it means the next time you cannot sleep, there will be more of these waiting for you. You do not have to do it now. You do not have to move at all. Just know that the door is open whenever you want it. And now, let us go back, far back, to a time before any of this marble was laid, and find out where a bank like this could possibly have come from. To find the beginning, you have to imagine the wizarding world without Gringotts, and that is harder than it sounds, because the bank has been part of the furniture for so long that its absence feels almost impossible. Yet for most of history there was no such place. A witch who had gold kept her gold herself. She buried it under the hearthstone, or hid it in the rafters, or carried it sewn into the lining of her cloak, and she lived in the low, constant worry of every person who keeps their whole fortune within reach of their own two hands. Money hidden in a house can be found. It can be stolen by a neighbor, lost in a fire, seized by a rival, or simply forgotten, walled up in some cottage that falls into ruin while its owner dies, without ever telling a soul where the coins were put. A great deal of old wizarding gold is still out there in the ground, under the foundations of houses that no longer stand, lost forever, because the person who hid it trusted no one, not even their own children, and then died with the secret still inside them. The trouble was not only theft, it was trust itself. Wizards have always been a quarrelsome and secretive people, slow to rely on one another, quick to suspect a curse behind a kindness. A merchant who wanted to send a large sum from one city to another could not simply hand it to a stranger and hope. He had to carry it himself, on roads that were not safe, past people who would gladly have slit his throat for the weight of his purse. Trade was small and nervous, because money was heavy and dangerous to move. Fortunes stayed buried and still, doing nothing, helping no one, because no one had built a place where wealth could be kept safe and counted honestly by hands that everyone, however reluctantly, agreed to believe. And here is the part of the story that the proud old families do not always like to dwell on. The hands that everyone learned to believe were not wizard hands at all, they were goblin hands. The goblins are an old people, older in some tellings than the human wizards who share their world, and they have always been different in ways that go deeper than their height or the shape of their faces. They think differently about almost everything, and most of all they think differently about two things that lie at the very heart of what a bank is. They think differently about making, and they think differently about owning. To understand Gringotts, you have to understand both, and they are tangled together, so let us take them slowly, the way we are taking everything tonight. Begin with making. The goblins are, before they are anything else, metal workers. This is not a hobby for them, not a trade among other trades. It is closer to the center of who they are. A goblin smith working silver or gold is doing something that a wizard, for all his power, simply cannot do, and both sides have always known it. Goblin metalwork has a quality to it that no human craft has ever matched. The objects they make are not merely beautiful, though they are that. They are alive in a way that is hard to put into words. A goblin-forged blade does not dull and does not rust. It takes in only that which makes it stronger and repels everything else, so that across centuries it grows finer rather than older. Goblin silver throws back the light in a way that ordinary silver cannot. Goblin armor shrugs off curses. The very best goblin work is so far beyond what a human hand can produce that wizards have coveted it, and sometimes stolen it, since the two peoples first met. And that coveting, that long history of wanting what the goblins can make, is one of the oldest wounds between them. Hold that thought, we will return to it, because it explains a great deal of blood. Now the second thing, the stranger thing, the thing that wizards and goblins have never once agreed on, in all their long history together, owning. When a wizard buys something, he believes he owns it. He pays his money, the object passes into his hand, and from that moment it is his, to keep, to sell, to give to his son, to pass down through 10 generations of his family, until everyone has forgotten where it first came from. This seems so obvious to a wizard that he can hardly imagine anyone thinking otherwise. But a goblin does think otherwise, completely and sincerely, and the difference is not a small misunderstanding that a few words could clear up. It is a wall between two ways of seeing the world. To a goblin, the true and rightful owner of any object is the one who made it. The maker pours something of himself into the work, his skill, his hours, his name, and that bond is not broken by a sale. When a goblin sells a sword to a wizard, the goblin does not believe he has handed over the sword forever. In his understanding, he has lent it. He has rented it out for the lifetime of the buyer, and the price paid is the rent. When that wizard dies, The goblin expects the sword to come home, back to the maker or the maker's people, so that it can be cleaned and kept and lent out again to the next worthy hand. To pass a goblin-made object down to your children, as though it were yours to give, is, in goblin eyes, a kind of theft, a slow, polite, generation-spanning theft, carried out by people who smile while they do it, and do not even understand that they are doing it. You can already feel, can you not, how a relationship built on this single disagreement might curdle over the centuries. A wizard family treasures an heirloom, a beautiful goblin-forged thing, and is proud to have kept it for 300 years. The goblins, meanwhile, regard that same family as a line of thieves who have withheld a stolen object for 300 years and counting. Both sides look at the same shining thing on the same mantelpiece and see opposite truths. Neither is lying, neither can be argued out of it, and so the resentment never quite goes away. It only deepens with time, the way a small crack in stone widens every winter, because the very thing that makes goblin work so precious, its permanence, means the disputes never die. The objects outlast everyone, the argument outlasts the objects. Now you have the two halves of the goblin mind that matter most, the making and the owning, and you can begin to see why these were the people, of all the peoples in the world, who ended up building the bank. A bank is a place where you trust someone else to hold what is yours. It only works if the holder is honest, and not honest by accident or by mood, but honest down to the bone, honest in a way that does not bend even when no one is watching and the temptation is enormous. Wizards could not be that for one another. They were too suspicious, too tribal, too willing to believe the worst of a rival and to act on it. But the goblins, whatever else might be said of them, had something close to an unbendable code where wealth and craft were concerned. A goblin who agreed to guard your gold would guard it, exactly, to the last coin, not out of love for you, for goblins have rarely loved wizards, but because their honor in matters of property is the spine of who they are. Cheating a depositor was not simply a crime to them. It was a kind of unmaking, a violation of the deepest law they kept. And so the strange thing happened. The two peoples who trusted each other least, who had hurt each other most, discovered that on this one narrow ground they could build something that neither could build alone. Wizards had the gold, and nowhere safe to put it. Goblins had the honesty, the skill in metal, and a genius for security that no human possessed. Out of mutual need, and a good deal of mutual dislike, the bank was born. The man, or rather the goblin, whose name became the name of the whole institution, was called Gringotts. We know little about him with any certainty, and much of what is told of him has the soft, worn edges of legend rather than the hard corners of record. But the bank that bears his name was founded, by the reckoning that most keep, in the year 1474. Hold that date a moment and feel how long ago it is. Long before the Muggle world had the banks and the paper money that it takes for granted now. Long before most of the great wizarding families had even risen to the prominence they would later guard so jealously. A goblin called Gringotts set down the first rules of the place, the first ledgers, the first iron understandings about who held what and how it would be kept. And from that small and difficult beginning, the empire grew. Consider what an act of strange genius it was. Gringotts did not have armies. The goblins, for most of their history, were a people pushed to the margins, denied rights that wizards took for granted, forbidden many of the privileges of the magical world. They were not permitted to carry wands. They were looked down upon, talked over, used. And yet this marginal people, with no kingdom and no army and no wand between them, built the one institution that the whole proud wizarding world could not do without. They did it not with force, but with two quiet weapons. The first was trust, the brutal reliability of their honesty, which made them the only ones fit to hold everyone's gold. The second was skill, the security they could weave into stone and metal, which made the gold they held impossible to take. A people who were allowed almost nothing made themselves indispensable. That is the heart of the whole story, and we will watch it work itself out, level by level, all the way down. Why London, you might wonder, and why that narrow, crooked street? The answer is partly chance and partly sense. The street we now call Diagon Alley was already a gathering place, a run of wizarding shops and stalls tucked away from Muggle eyes behind enchantments that turned the ordinary gaze aside. A bank wants to sit where the money already moves, and the money already moved here, among the wand shops and the bookshops and the sellers of strange ingredients. There was a deeper reason too, beneath the streets rather than on them. London sits on a great thickness of old stone and older clay, and below that, deeper still, lie chambers and faults and hollows in the rock that go down further than any muggle digging has ever reached. The goblins, who understand stone the way they understand metal, looked beneath that London street and saw not a city, but a vault waiting to be carved. The white building on the surface, grand as it is only the doorway. The true Gringotts is the descent, the miles of tunnel and cavern that fall away beneath it, and that descent was the whole point. You cannot rob what you cannot reach, and the goblins built the most unreachable place in the world, directly under the feet of an unsuspecting muggle city. So the marble hall went up, and the vaults went down, and the gold came in, at first a trickle, the savings of a few bold families, willing to try the strange new idea of letting goblins keep their fortune, then more, as those first families found their gold exactly where they had left it, every coin accounted for, and told their friends. Then a flood, because once a few of the great houses had moved their wealth into Gringotts, the rest could not afford to be the only ones still hiding coins under the hearth, vulnerable and old-fashioned, while their rivals slept soundly knowing their gold was beyond any thief's reach. Wealth gathers to safety the way water gathers to the lowest ground. Within a few generations, to have your gold anywhere but Gringotts marked you as either very poor or very foolish. The bank had become not a convenience, but a necessity, and a necessity is a kind of power. Everyone needed the goblins now, and the goblins, who had spent so long needing the permission of wizards just to exist, found that for the first time, the wizards needed them. Let us pause here, partway into the founding, and look closely at the coins themselves, because the money of the wizarding world is a small marvel that most people handle every day without ever really seeing, and the bank is the place where all of it begins and ends. There are 3 coins, and they are made of 3 metals, and the relationship between them is older and odder than any muggle currency. The largest and most valuable is the galleon, a heavy coin of pure gold, broad as the top joint of a thumb and weighty in the palm in a way that paper money can never be. To hold a single galleon is to feel a small, dense piece of real wealth, warm from a pocket, scratched and worn at the edges from passing through 100 hands. Below the galleon comes the sickle, a coin of silver, smaller and lighter, and below the sickle comes the canute, the humblest of the 3, a little bronze coin worth very little on its own, the sort of coin a child might be given for sweets, or a beggar might be tossed in a doorway. Now here is where the wizarding world shows its strangeness, and where you can almost hear the goblins laughing softly behind their counters. The coins do not relate to one another by tens, the clean, simple way muggle money does. There are 17 sickles to a galleon, not 10, not 20, 17. And there are 29 cants to a sickle, not 100, not even 30, 29, an awkward prime number that no human accountant would ever have chosen. To work out how many bronze nuts make up a single gold galleon, you must multiply 17 by 29 and arrive at the curious figure of 493. This is not a system designed for the ease of the customer. It is a system that rewards exactly the kind of patient, precise, untiring calculation that goblins are better at than anyone alive. Every transaction in the wizarding world, every change made, every exchange rate set, runs through arithmetic that a tired wizard fumbles and a goblin performs in his sleep. The very shape of the money tilts the floor, very slightly, toward the people who count it. That tilt is small in any single sum, almost nothing, a few knuts here and there, but the bank handles every sum, made by everyone, forever, and a tiny advantage taken across the whole wealth of a society, across centuries, is not small at all. It is a fortune that builds itself drop by drop, in the gap between what a wizard can easily calculate and what a goblin can. The coins are minted, by old arrangement, under goblin hands, and they carry small marks that tell the trained eye where and when they were struck, and whether they are true. A goblin handling a galleon can tell at a touch and a glance whether the gold is real, whether the weight is right, whether some clever forger has tried to pass off a coin of gilded lead. This is harder than it sounds, and more important than it seems, because a currency is only worth anything so long as everyone believes the coins are real. The moment people begin to fear that half the galleons in circulation might be fakes, the whole system of trust collapses, and trade grinds to a halt, and the careful work of centuries unravels in a season of panic. The goblins guard against this with the same cold thoroughness they bring to everything. Their scales and their eyeglasses, and their long sensitive fingers, are the quiet wall that keeps the money honest. And because the money stays honest, the world keeps using it. And because the world keeps using it, the bank that mints and weighs and guards it sits at the very center of everything. Take away Gringotts, and you do not merely close a building, you pull the floor out from under the entire economy. Every fortune held there becomes unreachable. Every coin becomes suspect. The whole structure of wizarding wealth, built up over 500 years, rests on the goblins continuing, day after day, to do exactly what they have always done. That is a power no army could match, and the goblins hold it not with a single sword drawn, but with scales and ledgers, and an honesty that does not bend. There is also the matter of the exchange, the counter where the magical world meets the muggle one. Wizards do, now and then, need muggle money, and muggles, very occasionally, and usually without understanding what is happening, find themselves in possession of wizarding gold. Gringotts handles the boundary between the two. A witch raised in a wizarding family who must venture into the muggle world for some errand can change a handful of galleons for muggle notes at the bank, and a muggle-born child arriving for the first time, clutching the savings their non-magical parents have set aside, can convert that ordinary money into the gold and silver and bronze of the world they are entering. The rates at that counter are set by goblins, and they are not set for charity. A small turn of profit is taken on every exchange, in both directions, the way water is taken by a wheel as it passes. Multiply that small turn by every wizard who ever needed muggle cash, and every muggle-born who ever changed their family's savings into galleons, across 5 centuries, and once again you find the same pattern. A tiny, fair, almost invisible advantage, taken on an enormous flow, accumulating into wealth beyond reckoning. The goblins did not get rich by any single great theft or conquest. They got rich the way water wears a canyon, by being present at every transaction, taking a little, and never, ever stopping. This is the genius of the place, and it is worth sitting with as you lie there in the dark. The most powerful institution in the wizarding world was not built by the most powerful people in it. It was built by some of the least powerful, a people forbidden wands, denied rights, pushed to the edges of every gathering. They built it not by becoming powerful in the ordinary way, with armies and conquest and loud display, but by making themselves the one thing the powerful could not live without, and then by being, in that one narrow function, utterly and unbendingly reliable. The wizards who looked down on goblins handed those same goblins their entire fortunes, because there was no one else they could trust to hold them. And every day that the goblins held that gold honestly, the dependence grew a little deeper, and the chain that bound the proud wizarding world to its despised bankers grew a little harder to break. By the time anyone might have thought to wonder whether it was wise to let a resentful people control the flow of all the world's money, it was far too late. The gold was already in the vaults. The vaults were already a mile underground, and the only ones who knew the way down were the goblins. We have stood in the hall now, and read the warning on the silver doors, and walked back to the founding and the strange mind of the people who made it, and looked closely at the coins, and the quiet, endless profit hidden in their awkward sums. We have seen how a marginal people made themselves the indispensable center of a world that scorned them, but we have not yet gone down. We have not yet stepped into the cart and felt the floor of the world fall away beneath us. We have not yet seen what waits in the dark to punish the warning carved on the doors, the dragons and the curses, and the falling water that strips a thief of every disguise. That descent is where we go next, deeper than the lamps, deeper than the carts, down to the oldest vaults where the air turns cold and strange, and something very large breathes in the dark. For now, stay here a moment longer, in the quiet of the hall, with the soft click of the scales, and the scratch of the quills, and the gold piled high behind every door. Let it be enough, for now, simply to know that the way down is there, and that we will walk it together, slowly, when you are ready. So now we go down, stand at one of the small doors that lead off the great marble hall, the ones the goblins usher people through, and watch it open onto something that the grandeur of the entrance gives no warning of at all. The marble stops, the polished floor and the high ceiling and the careful counters are gone, and in their place is rough stone, narrow and dim, lit by torches that have been burning so long the walls above them are black with soot. The air changes the moment you cross the threshold. It is cooler here, and it carries a faint smell of damp rock and old smoke. And underneath that, something else, something metallic and cold that you cannot name yet, but will come to understand before the night is through. A goblin waits for you on a small platform beside a set of narrow railway tracks, and on the tracks sits a cart. The cart is the first surprise, and it is a deliberate one. It is small and plain, a rough thing of iron and wood, with no comfort to it, and no seatbelt, and no soft word of reassurance, and the goblin gestures for you to climb in without ceremony. There is no driver in the way a muggle would understand a driver. The carts of Gringotts are not steered. They run on their own, along their own ancient logic, choosing their own speed by some understanding between the rails and the goblin sitting in the front. And the moment everyone is aboard the cart, simply goes. It does not ease away. It drops. The floor of the tunnel falls out from beneath the track, and the cart hurls itself down into the dark, and the wind tears past your face, and the torches become a smeared yellow streak on either side, and the only sounds in the whole world are the shriek of iron wheels on iron rail, and the rush of cold air, and the deep groaning echo of the stone all around you. The cart whips left, then right, then plunges again, deeper, and the temperature falls with every second of the fall, and you understand without anyone telling you that you are going somewhere no ordinary person was ever meant to go. This is not bad design. It is the opposite. The wildness of the cart ride is itself a defense, the first of many, and a clever one. A thief who somehow talked his way past the goblins in the hall, who somehow had a key or forged a paper, would still have to survive the descent, and the descent is built to disorient. By the time the cart reaches the lower levels, even a person who has made the trip before has lost all sense of how far down they have come, or in which direction, or how they would ever find the way back up without a goblin to guide them. The maze of tunnels under Gringotts has never been mapped by any wizard, because no wizard has ever been allowed to learn it, and the carts move too fast and twist too sharply for anyone to memorize the route. You could ride down to your own vault 100 times across your whole life, and never once be able to walk back to the surface alone. The goblins made certain of that. The way down is not a road, it is a current, and only the goblins know how to swim against it. As the cart descends, the nature of the place reveals itself in layers, and the layers tell a story if you know how to read them. The vaults near the top, the ones reached first, are the small and ordinary ones. These belong to families of modest means, holding a few hundred galleons, the savings of a lifetime of careful work, kept safe, but not guarded with any special fury, because there is not enough in them to tempt the truly dangerous kind of thief. As the cart goes deeper, the vaults grow larger and older and richer, and the defenses around them grow accordingly. There is a principle at work in the whole architecture of the place, simple to state and terrible in practice. The deeper you go, the older the vault, the greater the fortune, and the worse the things waiting to protect it. Wealth and danger descend together. The oldest families, the ones whose gold has sat in Gringotts since not long after the bank was founded, hold the deepest vaults of all, down where the rock is colder than ice, and the lamps are few and far between, and the silence has a weight to it that presses on the ears. To reach the bottom is to travel back through the whole history of wizarding wealth, the cart falling past 5 centuries of accumulated gold, the newest and smallest fortunes near the surface, the oldest and most dangerous hoards at the very root of the world. The temperature is worth dwelling on, because it is one of the things a person never forgets after riding the carts. Near the surface the air is merely cool, lower down it turns genuinely cold, the cold of a cave that has never once felt the sun, a still and ancient cold that seems to come up out of the stone itself, rather than down from any sky. The torches do little against it. Your breath begins to show in the torchlight. The rails grow slick in places where water has found its way down through some crack in the rock above, and frozen, or nearly frozen, into a thin glaze on the iron. And every so often, as the cart rushes through a wider cavern, you feel the air change again, grow damp and heavy, and you understand that somewhere out in the dark beyond the reach of the light, there is water, a great deal of water, still and black and very deep. There is, in the lowest reaches of Gringotts, an underground lake. It is not on any visitor's route, and most who bank there will never see it, but it is there, a vast sheet of black water lying in a cavern so large that the torch of a passing cart cannot find the far side or the ceiling above it. The water does not move. There is no wind down here to stir it, and no river feeding it that anyone has traced, and so it lies perfectly flat and perfectly still, a black mirror in the dark, and the small sounds of the cart go skating out across it and come echoing back, changed, softened, stretched, as though something out on the water had caught your voice and was repeating it slowly to itself. The goblins say little about the lake, whether anything lives in it, whether it has a bottom, whether it was carved by their hands or was already there in the rock when they first came down with their lamps and their tools. They have never been willing to say. It is simply part of the deep, one more cold and ancient thing in a place full of them, and the carts rush past it and on, down, toward the vaults that matter most and are guarded worst. Now we come to the doors, and to the strange and frightening way the deepest vaults are sealed, because this is where the genius of goblin security stops being merely clever and becomes something closer to cruel. The ordinary vaults, the ones near the top, have keys. A small gold key, kept by the family or held in trust at the bank, fits a lock in the vault door, and a goblin turns it, and the door swings open in the ordinary way. But the deeper vaults, the old high-security ones, have no keyholes at all. Run your hand across one of those doors, and you will find it smooth, a single great expanse of dark metal, with no lock, no handle, no seam, nothing for a tool to grip, or a pick to worry at. There is no lock, because there is nothing a lock could do that the goblins have not done better. To open one of these doors, a goblin walks up to it and presses one long finger against the metal and draws it slowly down the surface, and at the touch of goblin skin, the door simply melts away, the solid metal turning to vapor and parting like a curtain, revealing the cavern of treasure beyond. A moment later, once the visitor has stepped through, the door reforms behind them, solid again, seamless again, as though it had never opened at all. Here is the part that should make you glad you are only a listener tonight, and not a thief. The door knows a goblin's touch, and it answers only to a goblin's touch, and it has been told, in the deep way that goblins can tell a thing made of metal and enchantment, exactly what to do if anyone who is not a goblin should lay a hand on it and try to force a way through. If a wizard, or anyone else who is not of goblin blood, touches one of those doors and attempts to open it, the door does not resist. It does something far worse. It opens, and it pulls the thief in, swallowing them through the metal and into the vault, and then it seals shut behind them, and there the thief stays, trapped, sealed inside a stone box a mile underground, in total darkness, with no key and no lock, and no way to make the door answer, surrounded by the very treasure they came to steal, and unable to spend a single coin of it ever again. The goblins do not rush to check these traps. They have no reason to. A thief sealed in a vault is going nowhere, and the gold is safe, and there is no urgency at all. So the goblins look in only rarely, perhaps once in 10 years, to see what the door has caught, and what they find when they finally open it is their own grim argument against the warning carved on the silver doors of the hall. Thief, you have been warned. Beware of finding more than treasure there. The treasure was real, so was the more. That alone would make Gringotts the safest place in the world. But the goblins did not stop at one defense, because they understand something that careless people forget. A single defense, however good, can be beaten by a single trick. The way to make a place truly safe is to stack defenses, one behind another, so that defeating the first only delivers you, exhausted and exposed, into the arms of the second. And so the road down to the deepest vaults is lined with traps of every kind, magical and physical, living and dead, each waiting for the thief who has somehow survived the one before. We have seen the maze of tunnels and the disorienting carts. We have seen the doors that swallow thieves. Now we come to the waterfall, and to the dragon, and to the curses on the gold itself. The waterfall is called the thief's downfall, and the name is exact. At a certain point on the track, deep down where the air is coldest, a sheet of water pours from the roof of the tunnel and falls across the rails, so that any cart going down must pass directly through it. The water looks, at first, like nothing more than an underground stream that has found its way through the rock, the kind of thing you might expect in any deep cave. It is not. The thief's downfall is enchanted, and it does one thing, and it does it perfectly. It washes away magic. Any concealment, any disguise, any enchantment laid upon a person passing through it is stripped clean off the instant the water touches them. A thief who has made himself invisible becomes visible. A thief who has changed his face with a potion has his own face come rushing back. A thief who has bewitched the goblins around him to believe he is someone he is not finds that belief washed away, the goblins blinking the water from their eyes and seeing, suddenly, a stranger where a friend had seemed to sit. Every trick of disguise that a clever wizard might use to talk and charm his way down into the vaults is undone in a single drenching second, and the thief arrives at the bottom soaked, shivering, and revealed, with every goblin around him now perfectly aware of exactly what he is. It is a beautiful piece of work, the thief's downfall, because it does not try to stop a disguised thief from getting in. It lets him in, lets him think he has succeeded, lets him ride deeper and deeper into the trap, and then, at the worst possible moment, far below the surface, and far from any exit, it tears the mask away and shows the goblins their prey. And then, past the waterfall, in the deepest and oldest part of the bank, there is the dragon. It is a real dragon, not a carving, not a charm, not a clever illusion meant to frighten, but a living dragon of the largest breed that exists in the world, a Ukrainian ironbelly, chained in the dark to guard the oldest of the high-security vaults. The ironbelly is the giant among dragons, a creature that can grow to a size that beggars belief, with scales the color of old iron, and a wingspan that could blot out a house. And the goblins keep one of these monsters in the lowest reaches of Gringotts, tethered by heavy chains to the floor of a great cavern, where it has crouched in the cold and the black for so long that it has gone half blind. This is the thing whose breath you smelled, faintly, all the way back in the hall without knowing it, the cold metallic tang carried up through miles of tunnel. The dragon is enormous and ancient and miserable, and its misery is, terribly, part of how it is used. The goblins control the dragon, not with kindness, and not with any bond of trust, for there is no trust between them, but with pain, and with the memory of pain. They carry small instruments, little devices of metal that make a harsh clanking, rattling noise when they are shaken, and these are called clankers. Over long years the dragon has been taught, in the cruelest possible school, that the sound of the clankers means agony is coming. Every time the instruments rattled, the dragon was hurt, again and again, until the lesson sank so deep that the creature no longer needed to be hurt at all. Now the mere sound of the clankers is enough. When the goblins want the dragon to back away, to cower, to clear the path to the vaults it guards, they simply shake the instruments, and the great beast, the largest predator in the world, flinches and shrinks back against the cavern wall in terror, expecting the pain that the noise has always promised. It has been broken so thoroughly that it polices itself, frightening itself into submission at a sound, and it has gone pale and scarred and half sightless from a life spent in darkness it was never meant to endure. There is something in the keeping of that dragon that tells you, more than any ledger ever could, exactly how far the goblins are willing to go to guard what has been entrusted to them. They took the most powerful living thing they could find, and they made it afraid, and they set their fear-broken giant in the dark at the bottom of the world, between any thief and the oldest gold, and they did it without a flicker of sentiment, because the gold was in their keeping, and nothing else mattered beside that. Hold the dragon in your mind for a moment, there in the cold, before we go on. We will come back to it before the night is over, because the dragon's story does not end in that cavern. One day, against everything the goblins intended, it will leave. But the defenses are not finished even past the dragon, because the goblins did not only guard the road to the vaults, they guarded the treasure itself. Inside the highest security vaults, the gold is not simply gold, it has been cursed, deliberately and dreadfully, so that the very act of touching it destroys the thief who reaches for it. There are two such curses, and they work together, and to understand them is to understand the last and meanest layer of the goblin's defense. The first is the Gemino curse, and it turns a vault's treasure into a trap that springs the instant it is touched. Under the Gemino curse, any object in the vault multiplies the moment a hand falls upon it. Reach out to take a single golden cup from the pile, and at your touch the cup becomes 2, and the 2 become 4, and the duplicates come pouring out, identical to the original in every way, gold gleaming and perfect, except that they are worthless, and they are burning hot. The treasure breeds itself faster and faster, the more the thief struggles. An avalanche of fake and scolding gold cascading down from the shelves, filling the vault, rising around the thief's legs, threatening to bury him alive under a mountain of his own greed. The faster he grabs, the faster it multiplies. The harder he tries to escape, the more he touches, and the more he touches, the more the deadly flood swells. A thief could be crushed to death or buried beyond rescue in a vault under the Gemino curse, drowned in counterfeit gold, killed by the very abundance he came to steal, and the goblins would lose nothing, because the true treasure sits untouched somewhere in the deluge while the thief dies among 10,000 burning copies of it. The second curse is called flagrante, and it is simpler and crueler still. Under the flagrante curse, every object in the vault burns whatever skin touches it. Not a gentle warmth and not even an ordinary burn, but a searing, blistering heat that sinks into flesh the instant of contact and goes on burning. A thief who reaches into a flagrante cursed vault has the skin scorched from his fingers at the first touch of a coin. To grab a handful of treasure is to grab a handful of fire. The two curses laid together, as they are in the very worst vaults, make a trap from which there is almost no escape and certainly no comfort. The treasure multiplies when touched, and it burns when touched, so that the thief is faced with an impossible choice. Stand still and steal nothing, which defeats the entire purpose of the break-in, or reach for the gold and be burned and buried at once, the duplicates pouring out scalding hot, the originals searing the hands that hold them, the whole vault becoming an oven full of fire that grows hotter and deeper and more crushing the longer he stays. To rob such a vault, you would have to find a way to touch the treasure without touching it, to lift the one true object you came for out of a roaring flood of burning copies, with the heat blistering your skin and the false gold rising past your knees, and the air itself growing too hot to breathe. It can be done. We will see, before the night is over, that it was done, once, by people desperate enough and helped well enough to manage it. But the cost was terrible, and they barely survived, and they were not, in the end, ordinary thieves at all. Stand back now and look at the whole descent as a single piece of work, because it deserves that. To rob the deepest vault of Gringotts, a thief would have to do all of this. He would have to get past the goblins of the hall, who weigh every visitor with eyes that miss nothing. He would have to survive a cart ride down through a maze of tunnels that no wizard has ever mapped, too fast and too twisting to memorize, into a cold and a darkness that swallows all sense of direction. He would have to pass through the thief's downfall and have every disguise and concealment and enchantment torn away from him in an instant, arriving at the bottom soaked and revealed. He would have to get past a half-blind, fear-maddened dragon of the largest breed in the world. He would have to open a door that has no lock and answers to no one but a goblin, a door that swallows and seals away anyone else who dares to touch it. And then, having done all of that, he would have to reach into a hoard of treasure cursed, to multiply into a burning, crushing flood, and to scald the flesh from his hands, and find the one true thing among 10,000 scalding copies of it, and carry it back out through the dragon, and the waterfall, and the maze, alone, with no goblin to guide him to the surface. Each defense by itself would stop almost anyone. Stacked together, one behind another, they make the most secure place that has ever existed in the wizarding world or any other. The goblins did not build a strong room. They built a descent into a trap that grows worse with every level, a place where success at each stage only carries you deeper into danger. And they did it so well that for most of the bank's long history, the very idea of robbing Gringotts was treated as a kind of madness, a thing only a fool or a dead man would attempt. And yet, the bank has been broken into, twice in fact, within living memory, and both times the story is stranger than any thief's tale, because both times the thieves were not after gold at all. We will come to both before the night is through. But to understand why anyone would attempt the impossible, and why the goblins guard the deep vaults with such fury in the first place, we have to leave the tunnels for a while, and go back up into the history of the place, to the great old families whose fortunes lie at the bottom of the bank, and to the long and bloody quarrel between goblins and wizards that runs underneath the whole institution like a second, darker set of tunnels. That is where we go next. For now, let the cart carry you slowly back up through the cold and the dark, past the still black lake, past the sleeping shapes of the deep vaults, up toward the torchlight and the murmur of the hall, and rest there a while in the knowing of how deep the safety goes, and what it costs. and what waits in the dark for anyone who has not been warned. We have seen what guards the gold. Now let us look at the gold itself, or rather at the vaults that hold it, because the vaults of Gringotts are not all the same, and the differences between them tell the whole history of the wizarding world if you know how to listen. Every vault has a number. The numbers are not assigned by chance, and they are not assigned in the order people might expect. The lowest numbers belong to the oldest vaults, the ones carved deepest into the rock in the early centuries of the bank, and those low-numbered vaults hold the oldest fortunes and carry the worst of the defenses we walked through a little while ago. As the numbers rise, the vaults grow newer and shallower and more ordinary until you reach the high numbers near the surface, the small vaults of recent families who have only lately had enough gold to need a place to keep it. To read the numbers on the vault doors as your cart descends is to read a kind of calendar, counting backward through 500 years of accumulated wealth, the present near the top and the deep past at the bottom. Tonight we are going to stop at a few of these doors and look at what lies behind them, because some of the vaults of Gringotts have held things that changed everything, and most of the people who walked past them never knew. Begin with a vault that, for a short and secret while, held perhaps the most valuable object in the entire world. Its number was 713. From the outside it was nothing remarkable. One more high-security door deep in the bank, a smooth dark expanse of metal with no keyhole, the kind that answers only to a goblin's touch and swallows anyone else who dares to try it. For most of its life, that vault held the usual sort of thing, the carefully hoarded valuables of those who could afford the deepest and safest storage the bank offered. But for one stretch of months it held something small and strange, a grubby little package wrapped in brown paper, no larger than the palm of a hand, sitting alone in the middle of an otherwise empty stone chamber. Anyone who had managed the impossible and broken into that vault would have looked at the little parcel and felt almost cheated, because it looked like rubbish, like something forgotten, like a thing not worth the curses laid to protect it. It was the philosopher's stone. The stone is the great dream of every alchemist who ever lived, and unlike most great dreams, it is real, though only one was ever successfully made. It is a blood-red stone, and it does two things, each of them beyond the reach of any other magic. It turns any base metal into pure gold, as much gold as its keeper desires, simply at the touch, and it produces the elixir of life, a substance that, drunk regularly, holds off death itself and keeps the drinker alive far beyond any natural span of years. The man who made it, an alchemist who had lived already for centuries by the time our story reaches him, had kept it hidden and safe for a very long time, and when it became clear that others had begun to hunt for it, others who wanted endless gold and endless life, and would do terrible things to get them, the stone was moved for safekeeping into the deepest security the world could offer. It was brought to Gringotts and sealed in Vault 713, behind the dragon and the waterfall and the curses, because there was no safer place anywhere, and everyone knew it. And then, on a single day, two things happened almost at once, and the timing of them is one of the quiet marvels of the whole affair. On the very day that the stone was finally removed from Vault 713, carried out by a trusted hand and taken to a new hiding place, someone broke into that same vault to steal it. They were a day too late, or perhaps only an hour. The vault was opened by the thief and found empty, the little brown parcel already gone, the most secure vault in the bank robbed of nothing, because the thing worth robbing had been spirited away just in time. This was the first break-in at Gringotts that anyone could remember, the first crack in the legend of the bank's invulnerability, and it sent a shudder through the goblins and the whole wizarding world, because if someone could reach Vault 713, then nowhere was truly safe. The goblins insisted that nothing had been taken, which was true, and that the vault in question had been emptied earlier the same day, which was also true, and they said as little as possible about how the thief had gotten down there at all, because the answer frightened them. The one behind it was no ordinary thief. He was the most dangerous wizard of the age, working through a servant, reaching for the stone that would have made him immortal, and he had missed it by the narrowest margin imaginable. Behind that smooth and ordinary door, a grubby little package had sat through it all, and the fate of a great many things had turned on the difference of a few hours. The people crossing the marble hall above never knew how close the world had come to changing. Far beneath their feet, behind a door numbered 713, now come deeper, to one of the oldest and most feared vaults in the whole bank, belonging to an ancient family whose name was spoken with a lowered voice, even by those who feared nothing else. The Lestrange vault lay far down in the deep levels, one of the low-numbered vaults, old as almost any in Gringotts, and it carried the full weight of the bank's worst defences. The Gemino curse lay on its treasure, so that everything inside multiplied scoldingly hot at the slightest touch. The Flagranti curse lay on it too, so that every object burned the skin that brushed it. The family that owned it was old and dark and proud, and the vault was packed to the ceiling with the gathered wealth and dark treasures of many centuries, goblets and crowns and armor and coins, heaped up in the cold, all of it cursed, all of it waiting to bury and burn any hand that reached for it. The Lestranges were the kind of family that kept dark things, and they trusted no one, and they had paid for the very deepest and cruelest protection the goblins could provide, and they slept easy, knowing that whatever they put in that vault would stay there forever, untouchable, guarded by fire and flood, and a half-blind dragon in the dark. Among the heaped treasures of the Lestrange vault sat one small object that did not look like much beside the crowns and the armor. It was a little golden cup, two-handled, finely made, with a badger engraved upon it, very old and very beautiful in a quiet way. To the family that owned it, the cup was a precious heirloom, a relic of one of the founders of the great school of magic, a thing of enormous historical value and pride, and they had placed it in their deepest vault, as they would place any treasure they wished to keep safe forever. They did not know what it truly was. They had been given it to guard by the dark wizard they served, told only that it was precious, told to keep it safe at all costs, and they had obeyed, sealing it away in the one place from which nothing could ever be taken. But the cup was far more than an heirloom. It was a vessel, an anchor, a hiding place for a fragment of the darkest wizard's own torn soul, one of the secret objects into which he had poured a piece of himself so that he could not truly die while they survived. He had scattered these objects in the safest and most secret places he could devise, and for one of them, the most precious, he had chosen the deepest vault of his most loyal and fearful servants, sealed behind every defense the goblins could muster, a mile underground in the dark. It sat there in the cold among the burning gold, a piece of a monster's soul folded into a beautiful little cup, while the family that guarded it slept on, proud of their heirloom, ignorant of the horror they were keeping warm. That cup, and what was inside it, and the lengths to which three desperate young people would go to reach it, is a story we will come to before the night is over, because it leads directly to the second and greatest break in the bank ever suffered. For now, leave the cup where it sits, in the dark, in the cold, behind the fire, and let us climb back up to gentler vaults. Not every vault in Gringotts holds dark heirlooms and cursed gold. Most hold only the ordinary fortunes of ordinary lives, and some of those are quietly more moving than any treasure. Consider one vault, numbered 687, that held the inheritance of a single small boy. His parents had been killed when he was barely more than a baby, murdered by the same dark wizard who would later reach for the cup and the stone, and the boy had been sent away to grow up among people who were not kind to him, and who told him nothing about where he came from. He did not know he was a wizard. He did not know his parents had been brave and well loved, and he did not know that deep beneath a London street, in a vault he had never heard of, his mother and father had left him a fortune. It was not the greatest fortune in the bank, not by a long way, but it was a good and solid one, a respectable mound of gold galleons and silver sickles, more than enough to see a child through his schooling and out the other side into a life of his own. For 10 years that gold sat in the dark, untouched and faithful, while the boy who owned it grew up in a cupboard under the stairs believing he was nobody and had nothing. The goblins held it for him exactly as it had been left, every coin accounted for, asking no questions, waiting. When at last he came down in the cart, a thin, bewildered boy who had only that day learned the truth about himself, and the door of Vault 687 swung open, and the lamplight fell on the gold his dead parents had left him. It was the first time in his life he had ever been given anything at all. There is something in that, in a vault keeping faith with a child who did not know it existed, that says more about what a bank truly is than any tale of dragons and curses. A vault is a promise made across time. The people who fill it may die. The child it is meant for may grow up never knowing. And still the gold waits, exactly as it was left, because someone, even goblins who cared nothing for the boy himself, kept their word in the dark for 10 long years. The bank holds the whole spread of wizarding society, and it holds all of it with the same cold, even hand, and that evenness is part of its quiet power. Deep down lie the vaults of the ancient houses, the old dark dynasties whose gold has lain in Gringotts for centuries, packed with treasures and secrets, and the long pride of families who have never had to worry about money in living memory. Higher up, in the smaller and shallower vaults, lie the savings of families who have far less. There are vaults that hold only a few coins, the entire fortune of a large and loving family, amounting to a thin scatter of silver, and a single battered gold piece, kept in reserve for emergencies. A vault so nearly empty that opening it is almost an embarrassment to everyone present. And the remarkable thing, the thing worth holding on to, is that the goblins guard the nearly empty vault with precisely the same care as the overflowing one. They weigh the poor family's few sickles on the same honest scales they use for the dark house's mountains of gold. They keep faith with the small fortune exactly as they keep faith with the great one. A bank that played favorites, that protected the rich man's gold and let the poor man's slip away, would not be a bank at all. And the goblins, whatever their many faults, have never once been accused of that. The poorest wizard in the world can put his last coin in Gringotts and know it will be there when he returns, counted to the knut, treated with the same grave attention as the treasure of kings. That impartiality is not warmth. The goblins are not kind, but it is something rarer and steadier than kindness, and the whole structure of trust that holds the wizarding economy together rests upon it. Take all the vaults together, the deep and the shallow, the cursed and the nearly empty, and you have a map of an entire society written in gold and held in the dark. Every family's history and fortune kept faithfully side by side beneath the same indifferent stone. We are about halfway down the long road of this story now, and if you have stayed with me this far, drifting along through the cold tunnels and the quiet vaults, then you are exactly the sort of person these stories are made for. If it is helping, if the words are doing their slow work and the day is finally letting go of you, then a gentle reminder that following along on this channel and leaving a quiet like before you sleep is what keeps these long journeys coming, night after night, for you and for everyone else lying awake in the dark looking for somewhere calm to rest their mind. You do not have to stir. You do not have to do anything at all, but breathe and listen. Just know that there are many more of these waiting for you, and that the way back here is always open. And now, having seen the gold and the vaults that hold it, we have to go down into a different kind of dark. Not the dark of the deep tunnels, but the dark of the long and bloody history between the two peoples who built this place together and have never once stopped distrusting each other. The quarrel between goblins and wizards runs underneath the whole bank like a second set of tunnels, older and colder than the first. And to understand Gringotts, you have to walk those tunnels too. Every wizarding child who has ever sat through a history of magic lesson knows the words Goblin Rebellion, and most of them know those words as a kind of lullaby, because the subject has a long and unfortunate reputation as the most sleep-inducing topic in the whole of magical education. The lessons are taught, at the great school, by a ghost, an ancient teacher who died long ago and simply carried on lecturing out of habit, droning through the centuries in a flat and endless voice, and the Goblin Rebellions are his favorite ground. Generation after generation of students have laid their heads on their desks and slid into sleep to the sound of dates and treaties and the names of goblin chieftains, until the phrase Goblin Rebellion has become, for many a witch and wizard, less a piece of history than a reliable cure for insomnia. There is a small joke in that, given where you are and what you are doing right now, and the goblins would not find it funny in the least, because to them the rebellions were not a boring lesson. They were the great wounds of their people, the times they rose up and bled and were beaten back down, and the fact that wizard children sleep through the memory of goblin blood is, if you think about it from the goblin side, one more insult in a history made of them. The roots of the quarrel go back further than the bank itself, and they grow from the same soil we dug in earlier, the deep disagreement about making and owning. Wizards coveted what goblins could craft, and would not accept that the goblins had any claim on it once it was sold. Goblins regarded the wizard families hoarding goblin-made treasures as thieves who smiled while they stole. That alone would have been enough to keep the two peoples wary of each other for 1,000 years. But there was more, and the more cut deeper, because it touched not on objects but on dignity, on the basic question of whether goblins counted as people at all in the eyes of the wizards who ruled the magical world. Wizards made laws, and the laws bore down on goblins in ways large and small, the most bitter of all concerned wands. In the wizarding world, a wand is not merely a tool, it is the very emblem of magical citizenship, the thing that marks a being as a full participant in magical society, and the laws of the wizards forbade goblins to carry them. A goblin might be a finer metalworker than any human alive, might run the bank that held the wizard's entire fortune, might be cleverer and older and in many ways more disciplined than the wizards who looked down on him, and still he was not permitted to own or carry a wand, because the wizards feared what an armed goblin might do, and feared still more what an armed goblin people might do if they ever rose in numbers. The ban was meant to keep the goblins in their place, beneath, unarmed, dependent. To the goblins it was a permanent declaration that they were not trusted, not equal, not free, a daily reminder stamped into the law that whatever they achieved, they would always be held a step below the least of wizards. They never forgave it. Of all the grievances the goblins carry, and they carry many, the wand ban sits closest to the bone, because it says, plainly and in writing, you are not one of us, and you never will be. So the goblins rose, not once but many times, across the long centuries, in a series of rebellions and wars that the ghost teacher's flat voice could never make boring to the goblins themselves. There was bloodshed near the wizarding village by the great school, in a rising that swept through the area and turned an ordinary inn into a fortress and a headquarters for the fighting. There were rebellions led by goblin chieftains whose names survive in the dusty histories, fierce and cunning leaders who gathered their people and struck at the wizards who had ground them down, figures spoken of in the old books with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. The wizards met every rising with force, called up their councils and later their ministry and their fighters, and put the rebellions down, sometimes brutally, always finally, because the wizards had the numbers and the open use of wands, and the goblins did not. Each defeat drove the resentment deeper. Each treaty that ended a war was a treaty written by the winners, granting the goblins a little, taking a great deal, and leaving the underlying wound exactly where it had been. The goblins would subside, and tend the bank, and wait, and in a generation or two the pressure would build again, and another rising would come, and another defeat, and another grudging peace. The pattern repeated across the centuries, like a slow heartbeat of violence under the surface of a world that liked to think of itself as orderly and just. And here is the thing that should amaze you, the thing that tells you most about what Gringotts truly is. Through every one of those wars, the bank endured. Even when goblins and wizards were killing each other in the open, even in the worst years of the worst rebellions, the gold stayed safe in the vaults, and the carts kept running, and the goblins behind the counters kept weighing the coins of the very wizards whose kin were fighting goblins above ground. The bank was, in a strange way, a neutral country in the middle of a long war, a place that both sides needed too badly to destroy. A wizard might hate goblins, might cheer the suppression of a rising, might believe in his heart that goblins were a lesser kind of creature, and still he would carry his gold down to a goblin-run vault and trust a goblin to keep it, because there was nowhere else, and nothing else, and no one else, who could be trusted to do the job. And a goblin might burn with the memory of every law, and every defeat, and every stolen heirloom, might long for the day his people threw off the wizards entirely, and still he would keep that same wizard's gold to the last canute, honestly, faithfully, because the bank's survival depended on its honesty, and the goblins understood, better than the wizards ever did, that their one real power lay in being indispensable. The hatred and the cooperation ran side by side, year after year, the two peoples bound together by the very institution that neither could live without and neither could fully control. Gringotts survived the goblin rebellions for the same reason it survived everything else. It was too necessary to break. The wizards, for their part, never stopped wishing they controlled it outright, and more than once they tried. There were periods, stretching back centuries, when the wizarding authorities reached out to seize the bank, to tighten their grip on it, to push the goblins from masters of their own creation down toward mere employees within it. The autonomy of Gringotts, the way the goblins set their own fees and their own exchange rates and their own security, with no wizard permitted to overrule them, galled the proud old houses and the officials who wished to govern everything. They could not stand that the most important institution in their world answered, in the end, to goblins rather than to them. So they encroached when they could, took what powers they could take, forced compromises that bent the bank a little more toward wizard control, and the goblins gave ground when they had to, and clawed it back when they could, and the long, quiet struggle over who truly ruled Gringotts went on beneath the surface of every polite transaction in the marble hall. It never fully resolved. To this very day the bank exists in an uneasy middle place, run by goblins, used by wizards, watched and resented, and never quite trusted by the ministry that would dearly love to control it, and has never quite managed to. The smooth murmur of the hall, the clicking scales and the scratching quills, sits on top of all of this. Centuries of war and grievance and mutual suspicion, like still water over a deep cold current. The goblins remember everything, the wizards trust nothing, and the gold goes on changing hands between them, day after day, because need is stronger than hatred, and the bank is built on need. We will leave the long quarrel there, with its old wounds still open, because we are going to need all of it to understand what comes next. The distrust between goblins and wizards is not a closed chapter of history. It is a living thing, and one day it would reach down into the deepest vaults of the bank and help to break them open, when a goblin and 3 young wizards struck a bargain that neither side fully meant to keep. That is where we are going, but first we have to understand the thing they were really fighting over, the goblin-made treasures themselves, and the most famous of all of them, a sword that has caused more trouble between the two peoples than almost anything else ever forged. That sword, and the goblin who helped steal into the Lestrange vault, and the great break-in that brought the dragon up out of the dark at last, are the road we walk next. For now, rest here a while at the surface, in the murmur of the hall, and let the old quarrel settle back into the stone, and breathe, and stay with me a little longer, because the strangest part of the whole story is still to come. To understand how the most secure place in the world was finally broken, you have to understand a sword, and to understand the sword you have to go back to the very beginning, to the great age of goblin craft, when the smiths of the goblins made things that have never been equaled and never will be. We spoke earlier of how goblins work metal, of how a goblin-forged blade takes in only that which strengthens it and turns away everything else, so that across the centuries it grows finer rather than older. The sword of Gryffindor is the masterwork of that whole tradition, the most famous goblin-made object in all the long history of the two peoples, and it sits, fittingly, at the very center of their quarrel, because no single thing in the world has caused more trouble between goblin and wizard than this one beautiful blade. It was forged something like 1,000 years ago, in the early days of the great school of magic, by the finest goblin smith of that age, a maker whose skill was so far beyond the ordinary that his name has survived 1,000 years, where almost everything else from that time has crumbled to dust. The sword he made is a thing of cold and simple beauty, a blade of pure silver that never dulls and never rusts, set into a hilt worked with rubies the size of a thumbnail, with a name engraved along the metal in fine letters. It was made for one of the 4 founders of the school, a brave and headstrong wizard, and it passed into his keeping, and from there it passed into legend. The blade has a strange and wonderful property that comes directly from its goblin making. Because it takes in only that which makes it stronger, it can absorb power from the things it strikes. And so, long after its forging, when the sword was used to slay a basilisk, one of the most venomous creatures that has ever lived, it drank in the basilisk's venom and kept it, forever, soaked into the silver. From that day the blade carried within it one of the few substances in the world that can destroy what is almost indestructible, and that single fact, a sword that swallowed the venom of a monster 1,000 years after a goblin first hammered it into shape, would one day matter more than anyone could have guessed, because the cursed little cup in the Lestrange vault was exactly the kind of thing that almost nothing on earth could destroy, and the sword was one of the very few things that could. But the sword is famous among goblins for a different reason, a bitter one, and it is the reason it belongs in this story rather than merely beside it. The goblins say the sword was stolen, the wizards say it was paid for, and the gap between those two claims is the whole gap between the two peoples, made sharp and personal and impossible to settle, hung on a single blade. To the goblin smith who made it, and to every goblin since, the sword is goblin property, lent to the wizard founder for the length of his life, and no longer. due to return to the goblins on his death, so that it could be cleaned and kept and lent again, as all goblin-made treasures should be, to the wizard who received it, and to every wizard who has held it since. The sword was bought and paid for, and is therefore his, and his heirs, forever. The founder died, and the sword did not return to the goblins, because the wizards did not believe it was owed, and so, in goblin eyes, it became stolen property the moment its first wizard owner stopped breathing, and it has remained stolen for 1,000 years, passed down through wizard hands, displayed in a wizard school, used by wizard heroes, while the goblins watched and remembered and burned. Every grievance the goblins carry against the wizards is gathered up and concentrated in this one sword. It is the perfect emblem of the long quarrel, a masterpiece of goblin making that the goblins believe was taken from them and never given back, gleaming there in the world of their oppressors for 1,000 years, a wound that never closes, because the object that is the wound will never wear out. The sword has its own peculiar habits too, which only deepen the dispute. It does not stay where it is put. It has a way of vanishing and reappearing, of coming to a worthy wizard in a moment of great need, presenting itself when courage is required, and slipping away again afterward, so that no one quite possesses it the way they possess an ordinary object. It cannot simply be locked in a vault and owned. It chooses, in some dim way, where it will be and to whom it will come, and this elusiveness has only made the goblins angrier, because a thing that will not stay owned is, to their minds, all the more obviously not the wizard's to keep. Hold the sword in your thoughts now, this 1,000-year-old goblin masterpiece soaked in basilisk venom and tangled in 1,000 years of grievance, because it is about to become the price of the greatest break in the bank ever suffered, and the cause of its undoing. Now we come to the goblin who broke the bank open, and his name was Griphook. He was a Gringotts goblin, clever and watchful, and old in the ways of the bank, and he carried in him the full weight of every grievance his people had ever nursed against the wizards. He had reason for it beyond the general history too, because in the dark years, when an evil regime seized control of the magical world, the goblins suffered alongside everyone the regime despised, and Griphook in particular had been ill-used, hunted and hurt, and he had come to trust wizards even less than most goblins do, which is saying a great deal. He believed, with the whole force of his people's old conviction, that goblin-made treasures belonged to goblins, and he looked at the world of the wizards and saw a long thieving line of people who had taken goblin work and goblin honesty and given back contempt and exclusion and the ban on wands. He was not a villain. He was something more uncomfortable than a villain. He was a wronged person who had decided, after a lifetime of being wronged, that he owed the wizards nothing, and who happened to hold the one skill that 3 desperate young wizards needed more than anything in the world. Those 3 were trying to do something that had only ever been done once before, and that time by the most dangerous wizard alive, working through a servant, and even he had failed. They were trying to break into Gringotts. They needed to reach the Lestrange vault, deep down in the cursed old levels, because they knew, by then, what the little golden cup truly was, that it held a fragment of the dark wizard's torn soul, and that it had to be destroyed if he was ever to be defeated. The cup was a mile underground, behind the dragon and the waterfall and the curses, sealed behind a door that had no lock and answered only to a goblin's touch. And there was the problem, complete in a single sentence. Only a goblin could open the door. No wizard, however clever, however powerful, could get into that vault without a goblin to melt the door away. And no goblin in his right mind would help a wizard rob the bank that was the one pillar of goblin power in the world. The 3 young people had the courage and the desperation, and even a piece of a plan, but they did not have a goblin, and without a goblin, the door was the end of everything. So they made a bargain with Griphook, and the bargain was built, from the first word to the last, on the ancient distrust between the 2 peoples, and both sides knew it, and both sides meant to cheat the other a little, and it is one of the saddest small stories in the whole history of the bank. Griphook agreed to take them down, to get them past the goblins of the hall and the defences of the deep, and the door that swallows thieves, and to open the Lestrange vault for them. In return, he wanted one thing, the one thing that would mean more to a goblin than any amount of gold. He wanted the sword of Gryffindor. He wanted the stolen masterpiece back, the 1,000-year wound healed, the goblin treasure returned to goblin hands at last, and he made the sword the price of his help. The young wizards needed the sword too, because it was one of the only things that could destroy the cup and the other soul fragments, and so they agreed to give it to him, but only once the cup was theirs, and each side privately decided that the other could not quite be trusted to keep the deal. A bargain made in mutual suspicion between a wronged goblin and 3 frightened children over a sword that 2 peoples had claimed for 1,000 years. It was never going to end cleanly. The whole weight of the history we have walked through tonight was pressing down on it, and the history does not let go. What follows is the second break-in of Gringotts, the Great One, and because this is a story for sleep, I am not going to tell it to you as a thing of noise and panic, even though it was both. I am going to tell it the way it would look if you were drifting somewhere just above it, watching it unfold slowly in the dark, the whole desperate descent playing out beneath you like something half-dreamed. It began, as so much at Gringotts begins, in the marble hall. One of the 3, a young witch, had taken the form of the very woman who owned the Lestrange vault, a dark and frightening witch of the old regime, her appearance borrowed through a potion that turns one person into the seeming of another. She walked into the hall wearing that stolen face, and her companions came with her, hidden and disguised, and the goblin Griphook came too, concealed beneath a cloak, whispering what to do. They approached the counter and asked to be taken down to the deep vault, and for a moment it seemed it might work, the borrowed face carrying them past the first suspicion. But the goblins of the hall are not easily fooled, and they sensed that something was wrong. They asked for proof. They knew that the real owner's wand had been taken from her, and they grew cold and careful, and the disguise began to fail under their questioning. And so the intruders did a desperate thing. They used a forbidden curse, the one that bends a person's will and makes them a puppet, and they turned it on a goblin and on a servant of the dark regime who happened to be there, forcing them to play along, forcing the goblin to lead them down. It worked, but it set something loose. The goblins of Gringotts are bound together in ways wizards do not fully understand, and the using of that curse on one of their own began to ripple through the bank, a silent alarm spreading through the goblin world, so that even as the cart carried the intruders down into the dark, word of the intrusion was already climbing back up toward the surface behind them. Down they went, the cart plunging through the maze of tunnels into the cold and the black, deeper and deeper, past the small vaults and the great ones, down toward the oldest levels where the Lestrange vault waited, and ahead of them, where the track ran beneath a place that the water fell, Griphook gave a warning, because he knew what was coming, and they did not. The thief's downfall lay across the rails ahead, the enchanted waterfall that washes all magic away, and there was no avoiding it. The cart had to pass through. He told them what it would do, that it would strip away the borrowed face and every concealment they wore, that they would arrive at the bottom as themselves, soaked and revealed, and there was nothing to be done about it. The cart rushed forward, and the water came down across them in a freezing sheet, and in a single drenching instant, the stolen face dissolved and ran away like paint in the rain. The disguises washed clean off. The 3 of them, and the goblin, tumbled out at the bottom of the world soaked to the skin, and entirely themselves. Every trick gone, exactly as the bank's old defense intended. They had been let in, let down, let almost to the prize, and then unmasked at the deepest point, far from any exit, just as countless thieves before them must have been unmasked. But these 3 did not turn back. They had come too far, and the stakes were too high, and so, shivering and exposed, and with the goblins above now fully awake to the breach, they pressed on toward the vault. And there, in the cold before the deepest doors, was the dragon, the half-blind Ukrainian iron belly, the giant broken in the dark, crouched in its cavern in its heavy chains, guarding the oldest vaults, as it had guarded them for who knows how many joyless years. It heard them come, and it raised its great scarred head, and it would have destroyed them, except that Griphook knew the bank's cruel secret, and the secret was the clankers, the little instruments whose rattling the dragon had been taught to dread. They made the sound, and the great beast, the largest predator in the world, flinched and shrank back against the cavern wall in terror, expecting the pain that the noise had always promised. And in its fear it cleared the path, and the intruders slipped past it, past the trembling giant, to the door of the Lestrange vault. There Griphook did the thing only a goblin can do. He laid his hand against the smooth, dark metal, and drew it down, and the door that swallows wizards melted away at his goblin touch, and parted like a curtain, and the cursed vault lay open before them. What waited inside was the burning flood we spoke of long ago, the Gemino curse, and the Flagrante curse laid together, the worst trap the goblins ever devised. The vault was packed to its high ceiling with the gathered treasure of the dark old family, and every object in it was cursed to multiply scaldingly hot at the slightest touch, and to burn the skin that brushed it. They could see the little golden cup somewhere up among the heaped treasure, the badger-engraved relic that held a piece of a monster's soul, and they had to reach it, and they could not touch anything to get there. The moment they stepped wrong, the moment a hand brushed a goblet or a coin, the treasure began to breed, the duplicates pouring out burning hot, the false gold cascading down and rising around their legs, the heat blistering their skin, the whole vault filling with a scalding, crushing flood of worthless multiplying gold. It was the nightmare the curse was built to be. They struggled upward through the rising tide of fire and counterfeit treasure, burned and desperate, reaching for the one true cup amid 10,000 scalding copies. And at last, with the goblin-made sword and a final reckless effort, they hooked the cup down out of the heap and seized it, the genuine relic, the soul fragment, theirs at last, in a vault that was now an oven filling with burning gold and ringing with the alarm of the awakened bank. And it was there, in that moment of success, that the bargain made in distrust came apart exactly as 1,000 years of history said it must. Griphook had the sword. In the chaos of the burning vault he had taken hold of the sword of Gryffindor, the price of his help, the stolen goblin masterpiece, and the moment the cup was in the wizard's hands he took what he believed was rightfully his, and he turned on them. He seized the sword and he fled, and as he went he raised the cry, shouting to the goblins of the bank that there were thieves in the vaults, abandoning the 3 young people in the burning chamber, taking the treasure of his people, and leaving the wizards to whatever the bank would do to them. He did not see it as betrayal, he saw it as justice, as a wronged people taking back what was theirs, and owing nothing to the line of thieves who had taken so much for so long. The wizards had meant to keep the sword from him, and he had simply moved first. Each side had decided the other could not be trusted, and each side had been right, and so the bargain ended in the only way it could, with the goblin fleeing into the dark, clutching his 1,000-year prize, and the wizards trapped a mile underground in a vault full of fire, betrayed over a sword, exactly as the whole long, sad history of goblins and wizards had been building toward all along. So there they were, 3 exhausted and burned young people, holding the cup they had come for, trapped in the depths of a bank that now knew they were there, the goblins closing in, the curses raging, the way back up impossibly far and impossibly guarded, and no goblin left to guide them or open a single door. By every reasonable measure they were finished. The bank had done what the bank always does. It had let the thieves in, let them reach the prize, and then closed around them in the deep, where no help could come. And it was here, at the very bottom of the world, with no way out and no time left, that they did the one wild thing that no thief in 5 centuries had ever thought to do, the thing that turned the bank's own deepest defense into the instrument of their escape. They went to the dragon. The great iron belly was still there in its cavern, the broken giant in its heavy chains, half blind and scarred and afraid, a creature that had spent untold years in the dark being taught to fear a sound. And the 3 young people, with nothing left to lose, climbed up onto its back. They got onto the chained dragon, and they broke or loosed the bindings that held it, and for the first time in longer than the creature could remember, it was free. It felt the chains fall away, and it felt the weight of riders on its back, and some ancient instinct woke in it, the memory of what a dragon is, of sky and open air and the right to go where it wills. It lifted itself up in the cavern, and it spread its enormous battered wings, and it began to climb, and what followed was the breaking of Gringotts itself. The dragon smashed upward through the bank. It tore through the deep tunnels and the old stone, ripping the very structure of the place apart as it rose, floor after floor, level after level, climbing through 5 centuries of careful construction with the terrible strength of a freed giant, the marble cracking, the tunnels collapsing, the goblins scattering before it. Up it came, through the deep vaults and the shallow ones, up through the maze that no wizard had ever mapped, up and up with the 3 riders clinging to its back, until at last it burst out through the great marble hall, through the high ceiling that the lamplight never reached, through the snowy white front of the building itself, and out into the open London sky. Hold that image for a moment, there in the dark, because it is one of the strangest and most beautiful things in this whole long history, and it deserves to be held. A dragon rising over London, the giant that had been broken in the deep, kept half blind in the cold for years beyond counting, taught to cringe at a rattle of metal, suddenly bursting up out of the earth into open daylight, the sun on its scales for the first time in living memory, the wind under its battered wings, the whole grey sprawl of the Muggle city spread out beneath it, oblivious. It blinked in a light it had forgotten existed. It climbed into the free air it had been denied for so long, three small wizards clinging to its back, and it flew, slowly and then with growing strength, away over the rooftops and the river, and out toward the open country beyond, away from the bank and the chains and the dark, free at last by pure accident, loosed into the sky by the only people in 500 years desperate enough to ride a dragon out of Gringotts. The most secure place in the world had been broken open, not by stealth and not by force exactly, but by three children and a freed monster, and its deepest guardian had escaped into the heavens, and nothing about the bank would ever be quite the same again. Below, in the wreckage, the goblins were left with ruin and fury and a legend in pieces. For the second time in living memory, the impossible had happened, and this time it was far worse than the first, because the first time nothing had been taken, and the vault had already been emptied, while this time the thieves had reached the deepest cursed vault, taken its most secret treasure, freed the guardian dragon, and torn the bank half apart on their way out. The story of Gringotts the Unbreakable, the safest place in the world, the fortress that no thief could ever rob, lay shattered in the marble dust along with the ceiling, and word of it would race through the wizarding world like fire. What the breaking of the bank meant, and how the dark regime that had seized control responded to it, and what became of the goblins and the dragon, and the long quarrel afterward, is where we turn next, in the last part of our long descent. But for now, simply stay with the dragon a while, up there in the open sky, flying slowly away from everything that had held it down, and let that be the picture you rest in. The broken giant carried up out of the dark and into the light, free, against all the odds, in a world that had given it nothing but chains. A dragon over London, three thieves vanished into the open country, the deepest vault robbed of its most secret treasure, the marble hall split open to the sky. That was the wreckage the goblins were left to stand in once the dust settled, and the days that followed were among the hardest the bank had ever known, harder in their way than any of the rebellions, because this time the wound was not pride alone, but the very thing the bank had always sold, the certainty that nothing kept in Gringotts could ever be taken. That certainty was gone now, cracked beyond any mending, and everyone in the wizarding world knew it within a day. But there was a deeper trouble than a damaged reputation, and to understand it, you have to remember what was happening in the wider world at the time of the breaking. The bank was robbed in the worst year of a dark and terrible age, a time when an evil regime had seized control of the magical world and bent its every institution to its will. The ministry had fallen under that regime's grip, the school had fallen, and the bank, the proud independent bank that had kept its autonomy through 5 centuries of wizard resentment, had fallen too. In those black years the dark regime reached out and took hold of Gringotts, as it had taken hold of everything else, stripping away the old goblin independence, forcing the goblins to serve, watching the vaults, controlling the gold. The one pillar of goblin power in the world, the institution the goblins had built precisely because it made them indispensable and free, was for a time no longer truly theirs. It was the closest the goblins ever came to losing their own creation, the nightmare beneath all their long history, the day the wizards finally reached all the way into the bank and seized it. And it was into that bank, already under the dark regime's heavy hand, that the three thieves had broken, which is why the regime's fury at the break-in was so terrible, because the robbery had embarrassed not only the goblins, but the dark power that now ruled them, and dark powers do not forgive embarrassment. And then the age ended, as such ages do. The dark regime was thrown down, the long terror broke and passed, and the wizarding world climbed up out of it, blinking, to begin the slow work of repair, and the bank had to climb up with it. The shattered hall was rebuilt, the broken ceiling closed again, over the marble floor, the collapsed tunnels were shored and reopened, the counters set back in their long rows. Goblins returned to their stools and their scales and their ledgers, and the carts ran once more down into the deep, and the great underground lake lay black and still as it always had, and the murmur of the hall came back, the clicking of weights and the scratching of quills, as though the whole catastrophe had been a bad dream that the building was determined to forget. The dark regime's grip was prized loose, the old goblin autonomy slowly restored, the uneasy balance with the ministry resumed exactly where it had left off, the ancient quarrel still unsettled, still humming under the polite surface, still waiting. The dragon was never recaptured. It had flown free into the wide world and it stayed there, somewhere, the broken giant that had carried its riders up out of the dark, and the goblins did not get it back, and perhaps, in some buried corner of themselves, some of them were not entirely sorry. There is a lesson in the bank's survival that is worth sitting with, because it is the heart of what Gringotts truly is. Regimes rise and fall, dark lords come and go, ministries are corrupted and cleansed and corrupted again. Wars sweep through the wizarding world and leave it changed, and through all of it, decade after decade, century after century, the bank endures. It endures not because it is loved, for it is not loved, and not because it is strong in the way an army is strong, for the goblins have no army, but because it is needed by absolutely everyone, including the people who hate it most. Consider the proof the Dark Years gave. Even the evil regime that despised goblins above almost all other creatures, that would gladly have ground them into nothing, did not destroy the bank when it had the chance. It seized the bank, it controlled the bank, it used the bank, because even a dark lord bent on conquest understood that you cannot rule a world whose entire economy you have smashed, that the gold has to be kept somewhere, and counted by someone, and trusted by everyone, and that there was no one to do that but the goblins. The regime that could have ended Gringotts chose instead to capture it, and in that choice lies the whole secret of goblin power. The bank is too necessary to destroy. Whoever holds power in the wizarding world, however much they may loathe the goblins, finds that they cannot do without the goblins' bank, and so the bank survives every change of master, bending when it must, enduring always, the one fixed point in a turning world. There is more to the bank than the building in London too, and to see the full shape of the Goblin Empire, you have to follow its reach out beyond the marble hall and the deep vaults, out into the wider world where its work is stranger and more dangerous than mere counting. Gringotts does not only keep treasure, it recovers it. All across the world there are old and dangerous places where wizarding wealth lies hidden, ancient tombs and buried hoards and ruined strongholds, and many of these are protected by curses laid down so long ago and so cunningly that to reach the treasure is to risk a horrible death. The bank employs people to break those curses. They are called curse breakers, and they are among the very few wizards the goblins work with closely, and even, in a guarded way, respect, because the work demands exactly the patience and precision and nerve that goblins prize. A curse breaker is part scholar and part adventurer, a wizard who travels to the old dark places of the earth and unpicks the deadly enchantments guarding their treasure so that it can be recovered and brought safely back into the bank's keeping. Much of this work has long been done in the lands of the ancient world, in the deserts where wizard tombs lie beneath the sand, sealed for thousands of years and crawling with curses meant to kill any robber who disturbed them, in places like Egypt, beneath and around the great structures the Muggles built, and the magical chambers the Muggles never knew were there, lie tombs of long-dead wizards, filled with gold and bones and traps, and Gringotts sends its curse breakers down into them, into the heat and the dark and the dust, to face whatever the old sorcerers left behind. Some of those tombs have killed the people who entered them in ways too unpleasant to dwell on as you are trying to sleep. The work is patient and lonely and full of danger, and the young wizards who take it on are a particular kind, drawn to the old places and the locked doors and the puzzle of an ancient curse, and they spend years abroad in the service of the Goblin Bank, recovering the buried wealth of the dead. This is the part of Gringotts that most wizards never see, the long arm of the institution reaching out across the world and back through the ages, gathering up lost and guarded treasure and drawing it home into the deep cold vaults beneath London. The Empire is not only the building, it is a web that stretches across continents and down through millennia, and at the center of the web sit the goblins, patient and watchful, drawing everything slowly inward. Bring all of it together now, in your mind, before we come to the last and quietest part of our long descent. Picture the whole of it at once. The marble hall above, with its 100 goblins weighing coins and examining jewels and writing in their great ledgers. The vaults below, falling away mile after mile into the cold, the small new fortunes near the surface, and the deep old hoards at the root of the world. Every family's wealth and history kept faithfully side by side. The defences threaded through the dark, the maze of tunnels and the wild carts, the waterfall that strips away every disguise, the half-blind dragon in its chains, the doors that swallow thieves, the curses that turn treasure into burning flood, the currency that runs through it all, the gold and the silver and the bronze in their awkward sums that tilt the floor forever toward the people who count them, the long quarrel underneath, the rebellions and the treaties and the wand ban and the stolen sword, the two peoples bound together by need and divided by everything else, the curse breakers in the desert tombs, the web reaching out across the world, and through all of it, surviving every war and every dark age, the bank itself, enduring, needed, never loved, never quite trusted, never quite controlled, the one fixed thing in a world that will not hold still. That is the Goblin Empire, built by a people who were allowed almost nothing and made themselves the center of everything, and it is very nearly the whole of the story. There is only the last part left, the part where we ask what it all amounts to, and what kind of power this truly is, and then we let the long descent come at last to its rest. Stay with me just a little longer, we are almost there. We have gone all the way down and all the way back through the history, and now, before the very end, let us come back up into the hall and spend a while in the ordinary working life of the place, because the deep vaults and the dragon and the great break-ins are the dramatic bones of the story, but the true body of Gringotts, the thing it actually is on any given day, is the slow, quiet labor of the marble hall, and there is a great deal of rest to be found in simply watching it work. Stand again in the long room with its high lost ceiling and look at the goblins on their tall stools behind the counters and consider what they are actually doing, hour after hour, day after day, year after year. A goblin at the counter is the point where the whole vast machine of the bank touches an ordinary life. A witch comes in to withdraw a handful of galleons for the week's shopping, and a goblin checks her key and sends a cart down and brings the gold up and counts it onto the counter, and she takes it and goes, and the whole transaction is so small and so smooth that she never thinks about the miles of guarded tunnel her gold travelled up through, or the 5 centuries of trust that let her hand a goblin a key and expect, without a flicker of doubt, that her money will be exactly where she left it. That smoothness is the achievement. A bank works best when no one notices it working, when the holding of fortunes becomes so reliable that it fades into the background of life like the ground underfoot, and Gringotts has reached that state so completely that wizards take it utterly for granted, which is the highest compliment a bank can be paid. The goblins built a thing so dependable that the people who depend on it forget it is there. Watch the variety of what passes across those counters in a single day. A young man comes in pale and nervous to ask about a loan, because he wants to open a shop and has not the gold to do it, and a goblin examines his prospects with a cool and careful eye, weighing the risk the way a goblin weighs everything, and decides whether the bank will back him. An old woman comes in to add a few coins to a vault she has been slowly filling her whole life, savings against an old age she can feel approaching, and the goblin records the deposit in the great ledger without comment or judgment, just the scratch of the quill and the click of the scales. A grand and impatient wizard from one of the old families sweeps in, expecting to be served at once, and the goblins serve him with exactly the same cold courtesy they show everyone, neither hurrying for his importance, nor slowing to spite it, because to a goblin, a customer is a customer, and gold is gold, and the heirs of wizards are nothing to them. A muggle-born child comes in for the very first time, clutching the ordinary money their non-magical parents have set aside, frightened and amazed, and a goblin changes that money into the gold and silver and bronze of the new world the child is entering, the first official act of their life as a witch or wizard, performed by a goblin who has done it 10,000 times and finds it neither remarkable nor moving, only routine. The whole span of wizarding life passes across those counters, the hopeful and the frightened and the grand and the poor, and the goblins serve all of them with the same even, indifferent, perfectly reliable attention, and that is the daily face of the empire. The ledgers deserve a moment of their own, because they are, in a sense, the true treasure of Gringotts. more important even than the gold in the vaults. The gold is only valuable because the records are accurate. A vault full of galleons means nothing if no one can say with certainty whose galleons they are, how many there should be, who is permitted to take them out. The whole structure of wealth rests not on the coins themselves, but on the knowing, the vast and exact record of who owns what, kept in the great ledgers in the careful hand of generations of goblins, never wrong, never fudged, never lost. To falsify a ledger, to cheat a depositor by altering the record of what they hold, would be to the goblins the deepest crime imaginable, a violation of the very thing that makes them what they are, and so the ledgers are kept with a fanatical honesty that no human institution has ever quite matched. Every coin in, every coin out, every transfer and inheritance and loan, set down in ink, checked and rechecked, held safe across the centuries. The bank's power is not really the gold. It is the trust that the records are true, and the goblins have guarded that trust more jealously than they have ever guarded any vault, because they understood, from the very beginning, that the moment anyone doubts the ledgers, the whole empire turns to dust. Think too about inheritance, about what happens to a vault when its owner dies, because this is one of the quiet ways the bank weaves itself into every wizarding life from beginning to end. A wizard is born, and somewhere in his family there is a vault. He grows up, and the vault grows or shrinks with the family's fortunes. He marries, perhaps, and fortunes are joined. He grows old, and he decides who will have his gold when he is gone, and he sets it down, and the goblins record it, and when at last he dies, the bank carries out his wishes with the same cold faithfulness it brings to everything, opening the vault to the heirs he named, exactly as he wished, exactly as the record says. Across generations the vaults pass down, gold flowing from the dead to the living through the patient machinery of the bank, families rising and falling, fortunes building over centuries, or vanishing in a single foolish generation, and all of it tracked and held and faithfully transferred by the goblins. To be born into the wizarding world is to be born already connected to Gringotts, to have a place in its ledgers waiting for you, and to die is to pass your place to another through its keeping. The bank is present at the start of every life and the end of every life, the silent constant beneath the whole span of a wizard's years, and most wizards never once stop to consider how strange and total that presence is. And what of the goblins themselves, the people who keep all this turning? They are a nation, though they have no country, a people bound together by a fierce shared identity and an ancient code and a long memory of every wrong ever done to them. They are not human, and they do not think as humans think, and the differences run deep, in their conception of property, in their sense of honor, in their long patience, in their cold, relentless precision. They have been pushed to the margins of the magical world for as long as there has been a magical world, denied wands, denied governance, denied respect, and they have responded not with surrender, and not, in the end, with successful war, but with the slow building of an indispensability so complete that the world cannot function without them. There is a kind of greatness in that, a greatness the wizards have never been willing to see, too busy looking down on the short, clever creatures behind the counters to notice that those creatures hold the whole world's wealth in their hands, and could, if they ever truly chose to act together, bring the entire wizarding economy to its knees in a day. The goblins know this about themselves. The wizards mostly do not. And that gap between what the goblins quietly know of their own power and what the wizards complacently assume is one of the most dangerous unspoken things in the whole magical world, a tension that has erupted into rebellion again and again across the centuries and has never been truly resolved, only suppressed and forgotten and suppressed again. It is worth resting, as the hall murmurs around you, on the strange dignity of a people who built the most powerful institution in their world out of the only materials their oppressors left them. The goblins were not allowed power in any of the ordinary ways. They could not be wizards in government, could not carry the wands that marked full magical citizenship, could not win their wars. So they made their power out of two things no law could take from them: their unmatched skill in metal and craft, and their absolute, unbending honesty in matters of wealth. They took the one trust that wizards could not extend to each other, the keeping of gold, and they made themselves the only ones worthy of it, and then they made the wizards depend on that trust so completely that the dependence became a chain. A people allowed nothing made themselves the thing the world could not do without. There is no army in that story, No conquest, no throne. There is only patience and skill and a refusal to be anything other than perfectly reliable in the one narrow place where reliability was everything, sustained across 500 years until it hardened into an empire. The hall you are standing in, the murmur and the scales and the ledgers and the quiet endless counting is what that patience looks like from the inside. It does not look like power. That is exactly why it is so powerful. We have spent our while in the working life of the bank now, in the ordinary daily face of the empire, and there is only one thing left to do. We have to step back, all the way back, and ask what the whole of it finally means, what kind of power this truly is, and then we have to let the long descent come to its end, and let you, at last, go down into sleep. Stay with me for the last stretch. The hall is quiet, the gold is safe in the dark below, and there is one final thing to understand before we let it all go. Let us go down once more, slowly, and this time pay attention not to the dangers but to the stone itself, to the sheer physical fact of the place, because the building is a marvel of making, quite apart from anything it holds, and there is a deep restfulness in simply moving through it with your eyes open. The descent into Gringotts is one of the great works of construction in the magical world, and almost no one ever stops to consider it, because they are too busy worrying about their gold or their errand to look at the walls. Tonight, with nothing to worry about and nowhere to be, you can look. Begin with the entrance hall and the quality of the light in it. The lamps that hang in the hall are old, and they burn with a steady warm glow rather than the harsh white of anything modern. And because the ceiling is so high and so distant, the light never quite reaches the top, so that the upper air of the hall is always a soft golden brown, a gentle gloom that the eye cannot fully pierce. The marble of the floor is veined and cool and polished by centuries of feet, and it throws the lamplight back in long soft smears. The counters are dark old wood, worn smooth at the edges where countless hands and elbows have rested, and behind them the goblins sit raised up on their tall stools, so that they look down, very slightly, on everyone who comes to do business, which is no accident. The whole room is built to make a person feel small, and the institution feel old, and the money feel serious. And it does all of that without a single word, through nothing but height and stone and the quality of the light. Now pass through one of the inner doors and feel the building change around you. The marble ends almost at once, and the walls become rough-hewn stone, the marks of the tools that cut them still visible if you look, and the torches take over from the lamps, set in iron brackets blackened with the smoke of ages. The floor begins to slope, gently at first, then more steeply, and the air grows cooler and damper, and carries that faint mineral smell of deep rock. The passages here are narrow, only wide enough for the carts and their tracks, and they twist and branch in ways that quickly defeat any attempt to hold a map of them in the mind. The torchlight does not so much illuminate these tunnels as punctuate the darkness in them, a pool of orange light, then a stretch of black, then another pool, so that traveling down feels like falling through a long string of small bright moments strung on a thread of dark. And always the slope continues, always downward, the building giving way beneath you fold by fold, stone level beneath stone level, deeper than any reasonable building has any right to go. The deeper passages are older than the shallow ones, and you can feel the age in them, in the smoothness the centuries have worn into the stone, in the way the rock changes character as you descend through different layers of the earth's making. Near the surface, the stone is one kind, and lower down it becomes another, older and harder and colder, the bones of the ground beneath London laid down across ages no human history reaches. Water has found its way into the deep passages over the centuries, dripping down through cracks, and in places it has built slow formations on the ceilings, stone teeth hanging down where the minerals in the water have gathered drop by drop across 1,000 years. There are caverns down there so large the torchlight cannot find their far walls, and the great still black lake we spoke of long ago, and stretches of tunnels so deep and so cold, and so far from any living thing, that the silence in them has a quality you can almost touch, a thick, ancient quiet, that the rattle of a passing cart disturbs for only a moment before it closes back over everything, like dark water closing over a dropped stone. To go all the way down is to travel not only through the building, but through the earth itself and through time, the newest and shallowest at the top, the oldest and deepest at the root, and the goblins carved every foot of it, by hand and by craft, across 5 centuries of patient labor, extending the tunnels deeper and deeper as the bank grew and more vaults were needed, always downward, always into older and colder stone. Think about what it took to make this place, because it is easy to take a building for granted and very hard to actually imagine its construction. When the bank was founded, none of this existed. There was a London street with some wizarding shops on it, and beneath the street there was solid ground, ancient rock and clay going down into the dark, untouched. The goblins had to make the whole of Gringotts out of that, to cut the entrance hall and raise the white building above it, and then to begin the long descent, carving the first tunnels and the first vaults out of living rock, and then, as the years passed and the gold poured in and more storage was needed, to go deeper and deeper, extending the tunnels down through harder stone and colder dark, hollowing out new caverns, laying new track, sealing new doors. It was the work of generations, never finished, always growing downward, a building that has been under construction for 500 years and is under construction still, the goblins forever cutting new vaults into the deep rock to hold the ever-growing wealth of the wizarding world. The Gringotts that exists now is the accumulated labor of countless goblin lifetimes, each generation digging a little deeper than the last, so that the bank is in a sense a record of its own history, written in stone, the depth of it marking the centuries, the deepest vaults the oldest, the whole descent a kind of monument to patience, built by a people who think in centuries rather than years. Let us go back then to the very beginning of that patience, to the founding age, because we passed over it quickly before, and it deserves a longer look. Picture the wizarding world before the bank, scattered and nervous, its gold buried under hearthstones and hidden in rafters, its trade small and fearful, because money was dangerous to move and dangerous to keep. Into that world came the goblin called Gringott, with an idea so simple and so strange that it changed everything. The idea was trust, made into a building. Bring your gold to one place, he proposed, and we will keep it, and we will keep it honestly, and you will be able to come and get it whenever you wish, and it will be safer here than anywhere you could hide it yourself. It was not an easy sell. Wizards were suspicious of goblins, and suspicious of the very notion of handing their fortune to anyone at all, and the first families to try the new bank must have done so with their hearts in their mouths, half expecting to return and find their gold and the goblins both gone. But they returned, and the gold was there, every coin, and they told others, and slowly, across years and then decades, the strange idea took hold. The first vaults were few and shallow, the first ledgers were thin, the hall was smaller than the grand room it would become, and Gringott and his goblins kept their word, transaction by transaction, year by year, building the trust as deliberately as they were building the tunnels, until the bank was no longer an experiment but an institution, no longer a gamble but the obvious and only sensible thing to do with one's gold. We know little of Gringott the goblin himself, the founder whose name became the name of the whole empire. He left no portrait and no diary that survives, only the building and the system and the name, which is perhaps the most goblin kind of legacy there could be. A maker remembered not for his face or his words, but for the thing he made and the way it works, still working, 500 years after his hands first set it in motion. The oldest fortunes in the bank date almost to those founding years, and they lie at the very bottom of the descent, in the deep, low-numbered vaults, and they belong to families whose names have been spoken with weight in the wizarding world for so long that no one remembers a time when they were not great. Some of these old families have kept gold in Gringotts since not long after Gringott himself laid the first stone, their wealth passing down through 20 generations, growing across the centuries into the vast deep hoards that fill the oldest vaults. To stand before one of those ancient doors is to stand before a fortune that has lain in the dark, accumulating and passing from the dead to the living, since before the modern wizarding world took shape. There are vaults down there that have not been fully emptied in living memory, that hold not only gold but the gathered treasures and dark heirlooms and forgotten objects of families older than the records that describe them, things sealed away so long ago that the descendants who own them now may not even know exactly what their deepest vault contains. The bank holds the long memory of wizarding wealth in those deep chambers, the rise of every great house written in the growth of its vault, the fall of others written in vaults that dwindled and emptied and passed to strangers. A historian who could read the ledgers of Gringotts from the founding to the present would hold in his hands the entire economic history of the wizarding world, the fortunes made and lost, the families risen and ruined, the slow tides of gold moving through the centuries, all of it recorded in the patient goblin hand, all of it kept faithfully in the cold beneath London. And among the deep old vaults here and there lie the famous ones, the vaults that touch the great events of history. We have already stood before some of them tonight, before the vault that briefly held a stone that could make gold and grant long life, before the cursed vault of a dark old family that held without knowing it a piece of a monster's torn soul. There are others, vaults belonging to families whose names ring through the dark history of the magical world, deep and heavily guarded and full of secrets, the kind of vaults that hold not only wealth, but the carefully hidden dangerous things that powerful families accumulate and would rather no one ever saw. The bank does not ask what it keeps. A vault is a private thing, and so long as a family pays for its security and breaks no law that the goblins are bound to notice, what they store in the dark is their own affair, and the goblins guard it with the same indifferent thoroughness, whether it is gold or jewels, or something far stranger and more dangerous. This discretion, this willingness to hold whatever is brought to it and ask no questions, is part of why the deep vaults have held some of the most dangerous objects in the magical world across the centuries, sealed away behind dragon and curse and goblin door, safe from any thief and any prying eye, in the one place where even the most secret thing can be hidden with absolute confidence. The deep vaults of Gringotts are, in a sense, the great hidden cellar of the entire wizarding world, the place where its wealth and its secrets and its dangers all lie together in the cold, guarded by a people who keep what they are given and tell no one what they hold. We have walked the stone now and felt the age of it, and gone back to the founding and the slow building of trust, and stood before the oldest fortunes in the deep. There is only the ending left. Come back up one last time, up through the deep cold tunnels and the pools of torchlight and the long slope, up past the great still lake and the sleeping vaults, up into the murmur of the hall, and let us draw the whole of it together, and ask at last what kind of power the goblins truly built here, and then let it all go, and let you go with it, down into sleep. Stay with me for the last of it. We are nearly at rest. There is a particular hour, late, when the last customer has gone, and the great bronze doors are drawn shut, and Gringotts settles into the quiet of the night. And that quiet is one of the most restful things in the whole magical world. So let us spend a while in it before the end, because you are settling into your own quiet now, and the two of you, you and the bank, can be still together. When the doors close, the hall does not empty all at once. The crowds are gone, the day's business done, but the goblins remain, and their work shifts into a different and slower rhythm. The lamps are turned down low, so that the great room sinks into a deeper golden gloom, the high lost ceiling vanishing entirely into the dark, and in the soft half-light, a smaller number of goblins move quietly about the closing tasks. The most important of these, the one no goblin would ever leave undone, is the balancing of the books. Before any goblin rests, the day's accounts must be reconciled. Every coin that came in and every coin that went out, set against the records. The whole vast tally of the day's transactions, checked and rechecked, until the books balance exactly, to the last bronze canute. This is not a chore to a goblin. It is something closer to a nightly act of devotion, the daily renewal of the perfect accuracy on which the whole bank rests, and a goblin will sit late into the night, over a discrepancy of a single coin, hunting it through the ledgers, unwilling to sleep, while the books are even slightly wrong, because to a goblin, a book that does not balance is a small wound in the order of the world that must be closed before anything else can rest. So in the lowered light of the closed hall the quills scratch on, slower now, and the scales click, and the long columns of figures are walked down and checked, and one by one the great ledgers are brought into perfect agreement with the day that has passed, until at last the books balance, and the goblins can let the night come. Far below the hall, in the deep, the night makes no difference at all, because down in the vaults there has never been any day. The deep tunnels and the cold caverns and the sealed vaults exist in a darkness that the sun has never touched and never will, an eternal black that does not know morning from midnight, and the gold lies in it, exactly as it lies at noon, unseen, unmoving, silent. No one watches the deep vaults at night. No one needs to. The defenses we walk through are tireless and require no rest. The doors that swallow thieves and the curses on the treasure, and the waterfall that strips away disguise, all stand ready in the dark whether anyone is near them or not, needing no guard, sleeping never because they do not sleep. And in the deepest cavern the dragon crouches in its chains, awake or dreaming in the endless dark, the only living thing in all that cold, its slow breath the only movement in miles of silent stone. The deep of Gringotts at night is perhaps the stillest place that exists, a vast cold silence a mile beneath a sleeping city, full of gold no one is looking at, guarded by defenses no one is tending, holding the gathered wealth of an entire world in a darkness older than the world's memory. There is something in that stillness that the mind can sink into and rest. The thought of all that treasure lying perfectly safe and perfectly quiet in the dark, needing nothing, doing nothing, simply held, while above it the city and the wizarding world and you yourself drift down into sleep. And think, as you lie there, of what the closing of the bank means for the wider world above. All across the wizarding world, as the night comes on, the shops are shutting, and the day's trade is ending. The wand-maker counts the day's takings and locks the till. The apothecary tallies what was sold. The innkeeper reckons up the day's coin, and all of it, every transaction made anywhere in the wizarding world that day, every galleon spent, and sickle earned, and debt incurred, and fortune shifted, comes to rest at last in the same place, in the records of the bank, where the whole economy of a world is quietly reconciled each night into perfect order. The bank is where the day's wealth comes home to sleep. Every coin that moved through the world that day is, in some final sense, accounted for here, in the deep cold ledgers, the whole turning economy of the magical world, brought each night into stillness and balance, and kept safe through the dark. While everyone sleeps, the wealth of the world lies quiet in Gringotts, held and counted and true, waiting for the morning. There are few thoughts more restful than that, the thought of a place that gathers up the whole world's wealth at the end of the day, and holds it safe and still through the night, asking nothing of you, letting you set it all down and sleep. A few things still move in the bank at night, here and there, small lights in the great dark. Somewhere a curse-breaker returns late from a distant land, weary and dusty, carrying recovered treasure home to the bank's keeping, and a goblin meets him in the lowered light of the hall, and takes the treasure down into the deep to be sealed away. Somewhere a single goblin descends alone with a lamp, riding the cart down through the cold tunnels to seal a new deposit into a fresh vault, the small light of the lamp travelling down through the dark, and then climbing back up again, alone, while the rest of the bank rests. These are quiet movements, small and unhurried, the great machine of the bank idling through the night, doing only what must be done and no more, keeping the slow nocturnal watch that a bank must keep, because wealth does not stop existing when the sun goes down, and someone, somewhere, must always be keeping it safe. The goblins have kept that watch every night for 500 years, through every war and every dark age, and every ordinary peaceful night between. The lamps lowered, the books balanced, the gold safe in the dark, the watch unbroken, and they keep it tonight, while you lie here, the patient goblins in the lowered light, the tireless defenses in the deep, the gold lying still and safe a mile beneath the sleeping city, all of it held quiet and true through the dark, asking nothing of you at all, letting you rest. We have spent our night in the bank now, in its deepest quiet, and there is only the very end left, the last thing to understand, and then the long letting go. Stay with me for just a little more. Let the lowered lamps and the balanced books, and the gold safe in the dark settle over you. We are almost at the bottom of the descent, the true bottom, the one where you finally get to rest. So what kind of power did the goblins finally build here, beneath a London street, across 500 years of patient digging? It is worth naming clearly, now at the end, because it is not the kind of power the wizarding world usually counts, and that is exactly why the wizarding world has never quite known what to do with it. It is not the power of force. The goblins have no army, fight no wars of conquest, hold no territory beyond the building itself and the tunnels beneath it. Every rebellion they ever raised was put down. If power were only strength, the goblins would have none, and Gringotts would be a footnote rather than the center of a world. It is not the power of law either. The goblins make no laws that bind wizards, sit in no government, hold no office, command no one to do anything. And it is not the power of rank, the inherited importance of the great old families, because the goblins have no rank at all in wizarding eyes, are looked down upon as lesser creatures, are denied the very wands that mark a being as a full member of magical society. By every ordinary measure of power in the wizarding world, the goblins should be nothing, and for most of history, the wizards have treated them as very nearly nothing. And yet the bank the goblins built stands at the center of everything, untouched and unruled, and the nature of its power becomes clear the moment you notice one simple fact about it. Gringotts answers to no one. It sets its own fees, decides its own rates, designs its own defenses, runs its own deep affairs, and no king or minister or dark lord has ever fully ruled it. The ministry would dearly love to command the bank and never quite can. The great families use it but do not own it. Even the dark regime that seized it in the worst of years did not truly tame it, and when the regime fell, the bank simply resumed its old independence, as though nothing had changed. Gringotts is, in the truest sense the word can carry, sovereign. It sits outside the ordinary hierarchy of the wizarding world, neither above it nor beneath it, but beside it and underneath it, a separate power with its own laws and its own loyalties, holding up the whole structure of wizarding wealth, while answering to none of the wizarding authorities who imagine they are in charge. The goblins did not climb the ladder of wizarding power. They built a different thing entirely, off to the side, in the dark, and made it so essential that the ladder itself rests on it. There is a kind of sovereignty that comes not from ruling others, but from simply outlasting them, and this is the goblin's kind. Stand behind the counters in your mind, and think of all that those cool goblin eyes have watched come and go. Ministers have risen, full of grand plans, and fallen in disgrace, and the goblins weighed their gold on the way up and on the way down, with exactly the same indifference. Great families have climbed to the heights of wizarding society and crashed into ruin, their vaults swelling and then emptying, and the goblins recorded every coin of it without comment. Dark lords have gathered terrible power and threatened to remake the world, and have been thrown down, and the goblins were there before them, and were there after them, and are there still. Every passing power in the wizarding world, every king of a season, has had to come, sooner or later, to the goblins' counters, and put their gold in the goblins' keeping, and accept the goblins' terms, and then has passed away into history while the bank remained. To be the fixed thing that every rising power must come to terms with, and that outlives every one of them, is its own kind of throne. It is a quiet throne, in the dark, beneath everything, never displayed and never declared, but it is real, and the goblins have sat on it for 5 centuries, while the loud thrones above them changed hands again and again. And there is one last truth that sits underneath all of this, quiet and rarely spoken, and it is the right note to end the understanding on before we let it all go. The whole wizarding world treats the bank as permanent and neutral, as solid and dependable as the ground underfoot, something that simply is and always will be. But the bank is not the ground. The bank is a people. It is the goblins, with their long memory and their old grievances and their unhealed quarrel, choosing, every single day, to keep faith, to hold the gold honestly, to balance the books, to guard what they have been given. They have made that choice every day for 500 years, through every insult and every law and every war, and the entire wizarding economy rests upon their continuing to make it. The world above sleeps soundly, because it never thinks to wonder whether the goblins will go on choosing as they always have. That is the deepest thing about the power the goblins built. It looks like stone, and it is really a promise, kept in the dark by a people the world has never troubled to understand, and the world's whole wealth has rested, all this time, on the quiet faithfulness of the ones it looked down on. There is the empire, complete, not an army, not a throne, not a law, a promise, kept in the dark, beneath everything, by the patient hands of the goblins. We have come all the way to the bottom now, you and I, and before the last of the words let go, one final and very gentle thing. If this long descent has done what it was meant to do, if it has carried you down out of the day and somewhere near the edge of sleep, then know that there are many more of these waiting for you whenever you need them, more long, quiet journeys into the deep places of this world, made for exactly these hours, when the mind will not settle on its own. If you would like them to find you again, You can follow along here and leave a quiet like before you drift off. And that small thing is what keeps these stories coming, night after night, for you and for everyone else lying awake in the dark. You do not need to move. You do not need to do anything at all now, but breathe and let go and sink the rest of the way down. The door here is always open, and these stories will always be waiting, and you can come back down whenever you cannot sleep. And now, let us let it all go, and let you go with it, gently, into rest. Let the hall go quiet in your mind. The lamps are low, the bronze doors are shut against the night, and the crowds are long gone, and the last of the day's business is finished and balanced and put away. Let the marble floor and the high lost ceiling soften and grow dim. There is nothing left to count. There is nothing left to do. The books are balanced. The day is held safe. And far below the hall, the deep is dark and cold and perfectly still, the way it always is, the way it has been for 500 years. The gold lying quiet in the vaults, unseen, unmoving, safe. Let yourself sink down toward that stillness now, slowly, the way the tunnels sink down, fold by fold, into the deep. There is no hurry. You do not have to remember any of this. You do not have to hold on to a single word. Let the goblins behind the counters fade. Let the dragon in the deep cavern breathe its slow breath in the dark, far away, growing fainter. Let the great still lake lie black and quiet in its cavern, where no light has ever reached. Let the long tunnels, and the cold caverns, and the sealed doors all grow dim and distant, until they are only a soft, dark quiet at the edge of your mind, and you are sinking gently down into it, down past the small new vaults near the surface, down past the great old hoards in the deep, down and down into the cold still dark at the bottom of everything, where it is quiet and safe, and nothing is required of you at all. The watch is kept. You do not have to keep it. Somewhere far above you the city sleeps, and somewhere in the lowered light the patient goblins keep their slow nocturnal watch as they have every night for centuries, and the tireless defenses stand ready in the deep, and the gold lies safe in the dark, and none of it needs you, and none of it asks anything of you, and you can set the whole weight of the day down now, all of it, and let it rest in the dark with everything else that is held safe here through the night. Let your breathing slow, let your body grow heavy and warm and still. Let the last of the words come apart and drift, the way the torchlight comes apart into pools of soft gold and quiet dark, the way the deep tunnels drift down and away into silence. There is only the stillness now, the deep cold quiet at the bottom of the world, the gold safe in the dark, the watch kept, the books balanced, the night holding everything gently in its keeping. You are at the bottom of the descent now, the true bottom, the quiet one, and there is nothing left to do but rest. So rest, let go, sink down into the deep still dark, where everything is held safe, and sleep. Good night.